We now move on to that part of speaking which involves organs above the larynx. We've seen that we need an airstream, and in English we initiate that by breathing out. We need to be able to voice at least some sounds, and we do that by allowing the vocal cords in the larynx to vibrate. And then we have to look at what happens after that, because from the larynx out to the mouth there are considerable areas still to be explored. We're going to start by looking at consonants. Consonants are produced because the lips and the tongue can get in the road of the passage of air as it goes out. And the way in which that's done and where it's done gives us consonant sounds. Basically, the tongue and the lips move, and they are the active articulators. They themselves move, so they're active, and the roof of the mouth essentially is the passive articulator. That doesn't move, but the tongue acts against it, comes into contact with it in various ways. So let's start by looking at the various places at which blockages of various sorts can occur. There has to be a location for a blockage, and so this location is called the place of articulation of a particular consonant sound. We can start at the lips. Labial sounds are produced when the blockage is at the lips. Labiodental sounds are produced when the lips and the teeth are in contact. Dental sounds are produced when the tongue and the teeth are in contact. Alveolar sounds when the tongue and the alveolar ridge, you remember the hard ridge behind the top teeth, what my colleague Dennis Preston calls the pizza ridge, is involved. The pizza ridge is called the pizza ridge because that's always the thing that gets burnt when you eat your pizza when it's too hot. At least that's what Dennis says. Then there's the post-alveolar region just behind the alveolar ridge, the palatal region when you're on the hard palate, and velar sounds are produced at the soft palate. The tongue makes contact with the soft palate. Then we have various manners of articulation, that is, ways in which a blockage to the airstream can be created. We can either send the sounds out of our nose or through our mouth, and that makes a distinction between oral sounds coming out of your mouth, nasal sounds coming out of your nose. We can make stop sounds by stopping off the oral cavity in one way or another. We can make fricative sounds when, instead of stopping the sound altogether on its way out, we can create friction, that is, by having a very small opening through which the sound can escape, nevertheless creating some friction. We can open our mouths a little bit further, creating a very small aperture but no friction, and the sounds made in this way are called approximants because the tongue and the roof of the mouth are approximately together, they're approximating each other. Then the affricates, which consist of a stop followed immediately after by a fricative, and then there's a bunch of exotic sounds, trills and taps and flaps, and we'll deal with that at the end. Finally, we can ask, is the blockage in the center of the mouth or round the sides? That makes a difference between central sounds and lateral sounds. Okay, here we go. That was the list. This is the detail. The soft palate, as we saw when we looked at your anatomy, is a valve that can block off the passage of air to the nasal cavity. You remember, it's that soft flap at the back which you can move either up against the back of your throat, forcing the air out through your mouth, or you can lower it. When it's lowered, then there's room for the air to go out of your nose. Well, oral sounds are produced with air flowing out of your mouth, and nasal sounds are produced with the air flowing out of your nose. Well, it will only flow out of your nose when the oral cavity is blocked and you have the soft palate lowered. The velum is lowered, allowing the air to escape out of your nose. Well, what sort of nasal sounds are there? Well, English has three of them: m, n, and ng, spelt ng, but it's only one sound. For all stops, the oral cavity is completely blocked. Well, nasal consonants must therefore be stops, because in order for the sound to go right out of your nose and not out of your mouth, you've got to block your mouth. Well, when you block your mouth at the lips, you get a sound. How can you tell whether it's a nasal sound or not? That's easy. Make an M, and then squeeze your nostrils shut, and suddenly nothing happens. If you shut off your nasal cavity by basically pinching your nose so that your nostrils are shut, then nothing gets out of your mouth, and also nothing gets out of your nose. So you can tell that is a nasal, so is n. Again, try producing an n, and squeezing your nostrils shut. No, it's a nasal. And now the ng sound. Okay, they're nasals. What about oral stops, which are created when the soft palate is raised and no air can get out of your nose? Well, at that point, nothing can get out of anywhere, and so you have silence. If you make an M sound but close your nose off, then there is silence. However, oral stops can be released, and when they are, these are called plosives. They have an onset when the two articulators, the active and the passive articulator, come together to create the blockage. Then they have a period when the pressure builds up behind the two because there's nowhere for it to get out, and then there's a release phase when the build-up of pressure behind the blockage is released. So let's have a look at the T sound. You'll notice I've done something sneaky on this screen. At the top there's an M with two square brackets around it, and at the bottom there's a T with two square brackets around it. These brackets are conventionally used to tell you that we're now dealing with sounds and not with letters. This is not the letter T, this is the sound T, T. And this isn't the letter M at the top of the screen, it's the sound M. So square brackets surround phonetic sounds, phonetic symbols. Right, a plosive consonant like T, if you make it very slowly, you have an onset. What happens during the onset? Well, the tongue makes contact with the alveolar ridge, creating a blockage. It's then held briefly, and then it's released. T, 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 t. If you try it a few times, particularly if you look in a mirror, you'll see what's happening. What about fricative sounds? In the case of fricatives, the blockage in the cavity isn't total. There's just enough room for some audible friction. Try the sound S. You'll notice that there's a slit in the front of your mouth. You can again see it if you look in a mirror. S. And the hissing sound is created by the air squeezing through this narrow opening. This is a result of friction between the air and the tiny little cavity that's left for it to escape from, and so these are called fricatives because there is audible friction. Approximants are created when the vocal tract is narrow but not narrow enough to create friction. Try the sound y, y, as in yacht. Y. You'll hear that there is a certain amount of sound coming out, but there's no friction. There's not a s or f type sound. Y, y. It's quite a small gap. There's certainly a narrowing, but there's no friction to be heard. There are two sorts of approximants. There are the liquids, all and all. We'll talk a bit more about those later. And there's also the glides, y and w. Y and w have a kind of vowel-like character. They're almost vowels, whereas all and are much more like consonants. Affricates happen when, instead of releasing a stop fast, you release it slowly. If you release a stop slowly, there's a period when there's actually a very small gap, a fricative type gap. So if we look at the sound j in judge, it starts with a d, but instead of going d and releasing it quickly, you release it quite slowly and you get j, j, j. Again, it's quite handy to look in a mirror and see what your mouth is doing when you produce it. Judge, judge. And now for the exotics, the trills and the taps and the flaps. These are created by momentary contact instead of there being a reasonable period of time during which the articulators are in contact. Here it's very, very quick. The R in Scots is often pronounced as a trill, r, as in running, 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 running. The tip of your tongue taps 2, 3, 4, 5 times quickly against the roof of your mouth. And in French, if you say the same thing, you say running, and in fact your uvula is what does the trilling. The T in American butter is a tap. Instead of there being multiple contacts, there's only one very quick contact. You can say butter, butter. There's a very, very quick tap between the T being... there's no actual hold time. It's kind of a plosive, but there isn't any hold. There's just a quick contact. What about sounds that are made in the center of the mouth as opposed to round the edges? This involves the root of the airstream past the tongue. The tongue's quite big and the air has to get round it somehow, and you can either create a groove in the middle or have the air escaping round the sides. Round the sides you get laterals as an all. If again you look in the mirror, all, you'll see that the front of your tongue is hard up against your alveolar ridge, maybe your teeth as well. So the sound must be getting out somewhere, and in fact it's getting out round the side. And if you're fairly adept with your tongue, you can have it go around one side or the other or both. All one side, all the other, all both. Try it out. I don't think it's very sophisticated to do that, but you've got a very amiable tongue and I'm sure it can do both. Through the center, when you create a little groove down the middle and there is contact at the sides, you get a sound like sh in shelf. Sh. Again, have a look in the mirror and you'll see that your tongue has formed a little groove in the middle, and the sh sound sh is actually coming through the groove in the middle. So, on the basis of what we've just seen, there should be 3 major matters to note for a consonant. First of all, is your voice turned on or off? We looked at that previously. Secondly, where is this sound being produced? And thirdly, how is it being produced? What sort of blockage is it, and where is it? Voicing. Well, your voice is either turned on or not, and we found out how to test for that. You put your fingers either side of your larynx and see if you can produce a note. If you can, then it's voiced. If you can't, then it's not. Where is the place of articulation? Anywhere from your lips right back to your soft palate. How is it being produced? Well, anything from a nasal or oral total blockage through to these little tiny taps and flaps. B, b. It's in square brackets. Remember, this is not the letter B, this is the sound B. Try it for voicing. B, b, b. It's voiced. Where is it being made? Well, easy enough to tell looking in a mirror. It's being produced by your lips. And it's a stop because there is an onset, then there is a hold time, and then finally there's a release. It's a voiced bilabial stop, oral stop. Well, the IPA, as we saw, has ways of indicating all of this, and so it has a consonant chart. The consonant chart is in the Kuiper and Allan textbook, so have a look at it in there. There's a lot more sounds there than pardonnez-moi, there's a lot more sounds there than are used in English, but you can try them all out. For example, you can have bilabial fricatives, voiced and voiceless. F and v, v, v. Instead of f and v, which are produced between your teeth and lips. V and v are just produced between the lips. We don't use them in English, but they exist. So let's see if we can do this little exercise. Is it voiced? Yes, it's voiced. Because there's vibration. Where is it being produced? Well, by the lips. And where is the sound going? It's going out of your nose. So this is a voiced, bilabial, nasal. What about t? T. Alright, your tongue is up against your alveolar ridge. Is it voiced? T, t. No, it's not voiced. So this is a voiceless, alveolar, t, t, plosive or stop. All voiced, yes. All voice is turned on. All. The tongue is up against the alveolar ridge, and the air is escaping round the sides. So this is a lateral sound.